The Israeli military says it's killed 3 Palestinians in an undercover operation at the Sinai hospital in Jenin in the occupied West Bank. Reports say Israeli forces disguised as medical staff and Palestinian women killed members of an armed cell hiding inside. The Israeli military sources said the men were planning an imminent attack, identifying one of them as Mohammed Jenin. He is reportedly being receiving treatment following a drone strike. The Palestinian Authority confirmed that 3 people were killed at the hospital by Israeli forces. Hamas denies Israeli assertions that it uses hospitals to hide fighters. Let's bring in our Middle East correspondent, Mark Lewin.
CCTV footage shows Israeli armed forces going into the hospital, many of them disguised as Palestinians, some of them in women's clothes, some of them dressed as medics, and they shot dead 3 people who they call Hamas terrorists inside this hospital. Now, in fact, Hamas has claimed one of them as their own, and Islamic Jihad, which is a spin-off of Hamas, has identified 2 other of the victims as members of that organization. Israel says that one of them was planning an attack similar to the 7th of October attack on Israel, of course, and 2 others were... Sorry, it's incredibly windy now. 2 others, they say, that were responsible for a previous attack. Now, this is a sign of just how the violence in the West Bank has continued to spiral since the Gaza conflict began. In fact, the violence in the West Bank is really now the worst that it has been since the second Palestinian Intifada or uprising some 2 decades ago, and that is a real concern that Gaza's conflict has spilt over into the wider region, and that actually, in order to try to calm what is happening in Gaza, there is also an urgent need to calm what is happening in the West Bank, where violence by Jewish settlers there and violence by armed Palestinian groups on the settlers has reached a level that has not been seen in many, many years.
Well, let's talk more about the wider developments in the Middle East. The US media reporting that the drone which killed 3 American troops in Jordan on Sunday appears to have been made in Iran, a Shahed attack drone. Tehran has denied involvement, but the US has vowed to retaliate. Let's take you live now to Barbara Slavin, a distinguished fellow at the Stimson Center in Washington and a lecturer in international affairs at George Washington University. It's always good to have you with us. Washington, the White House considering its response now to this attack. We keep hearing about this menu of options that they have, and pressure is really growing on President Biden by some Republicans to have quite a firm military response. What do you think the best course is now for President Biden and the White House?
Well, you've referred to the tragic death of 3 Americans that were hit by an Iranian drone. Look, the best course is to bring down the level of fighting in Gaza. I would add the West Bank, too, in light of recent developments. I mean, I think we have to go to the source of the tensions, which have grown enormously between the United States and these various Iran-backed groups all around the Middle East.
Barbara, sorry to interrupt you, but on that, does it feel to you as if these links, though, are being downplayed by some at the moment? Antony Blinken, for instance, trying to separate what is happening in Gaza with the situation with Iran.
Well, the administration may be trying to separate them, but they're not separable. All of this violence became supercharged after the Israeli retaliation for Hamas's attacks of October 7th, became so massive. We've seen, over 26,000 people killed in Gaza since October 7th. And even if you assume that, 10,000 of them were actually Hamas fighters, that's still an extraordinary civilian death toll, and the destruction has been immense. And so all these various groups around the Middle East that are trying to show their solidarity with the Palestinians, what do? They look for vulnerable targets, and we have small American contingents in Syria, in Iraq, in Jordan, which are unfortunately very vulnerable to these kinds of drone strikes. Now, in this particular case, it appears that the drone could have been shot down, but it was mistaken for an American drone, which was returning to base. And so it got through and it hit an American barracks, and it killed these American reservists. from the state of Georgia.
So Barbara, what are the best options now? Because we keep hearing that the response from Washington has to be proportionate. It can't really escalate things, ideally, but also, because of political pressure, has to be some kind of effective deterrent. That's quite difficult for any response to be all of those things.
It's very difficult. And let me point out that the U.S. has already retaliated for previous strikes. It killed the leader of one of these groups in Baghdad earlier in January. So, there's all this talk about assassinations and attacking Iranian oil facilities and Lord knows what. But the best course is to de-escalate the tensions overall by ending the fighting in Gaza. And there are talks that have been going on, mediated primarily by Qatar, to get a long ceasefire in Gaza that would allow hostages there to be released, Palestinian prisoners to be released, and urgently needed humanitarian aid to go into Gaza. That's the best course. What will the U.S. probably do? It will probably hit some of these Iran-backed militia groups, Iraqi groups, groups in Syria, that are deemed responsible for the drone strike that killed these 3 Americans.
Barbara, can I ask you about those talks that you refer to that are taking place in Paris at the moment? Because over the past few days, there's been various comments made from delegates at the talks that are cautiously optimistic of some kind of deal being struck. How can that optimism exist, though, when Benjamin Netanyahu has coalition partners, his right-wing coalition partners in government at the moment, that will refuse to back any kind of ceasefire?
Well, the decision will be made by the Security Cabinet, which excludes some of these right-wing lunatics in Bibi Netanyahu's cabinet. And the deal that's being talked about would be, at least for 6 weeks, would allow the release of remaining women and children in Hamas custody, as well as, of course, some Palestinian prisoners. But I think, judging from the comments I'm hearing from the Qataris and others, these talks are well advanced. And I hope, and I think this is one of the considerations for the Biden administration, that any retaliation for what happened to the American troops would not get in the way of securing this long-term ceasefire. This is, I think, the main priority, and I really do hope that the Biden administration is redoubling efforts to get this ceasefire.